Hi guys, tonight we step once again into that slow, dim world where breath turns white. The moment it leaves your lips, where stone walls rise like frozen cliffs around you, and where a man on night duty learns very quickly that the cold can be just as dangerous as any blade lurking in the dark corridors below. And as you settle into your pillow or wherever you're listening from, I want you to let your shoulders drop, your breathing soften, and imagine that you are standing at the threshold of a medieval guard tower, boots planted on frosted stone, hearing nothing but the sigh of winter wind slipping through the ramparts like a restless ghost searching for a place to settle. And before we begin our slow walk through this forgotten world, I want to thank you for being here tonight, for choosing this quiet moment with me, and if you enjoy these gentle bedtime journeys through history, you're welcome to subscribe or leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is right now, because I love knowing what corner of the world keeps me company at night. Now dim your lights, let your eyes grow heavy, and imagine yourself pushing open a wooden door swollen with cold, the iron hinges groaning softly as you step inside the narrow tower stairwell. The air colder here than outside because the stone seems to drink the warmth from your skin, and you begin to climb slowly, each step echoing faintly around you, spiraling upward toward the watchpost where you are meant to spend the night. And as you climb, feel the temperature drop little by little, like descending into winter itself, until finally you reach the small chamber where the previous guard waits, wrapped tightly in his wool cloak, stamping his feet, as if trying to shake life back into them, before he looks at you with tired eyes and mutters, "Keep moving. If you stop, the cold will get you." And in that quiet moment, with the torchlight flickering against rough stone, you realize that surviving the night here has very little to do with swords or shields, and everything to do with warmth, movement, and the tiny human tricks that stood between a guard and the unforgiving chill. You step into the watchroom, and the first thing that greets you is the stillness. A kind of heavy silence broken only by distant sounds drifting up from the courtyard far below. A dog shifting in its sleep, a chain settling on the drawbridge, the faint echo of a kitchen pot being set down as sleepy cooks bank the fires for the night. And all these sounds feel muted and far away, as if wrapped in wool, because up here the cold dominates. It presses against your skin. It coils around your fingers, it sinks into your bones with patient determination. And you understand instantly why guards dreaded this post, more in winter than during any enemy siege. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, feeling the weight of the rough wool settle against your neck, scratchy but comforting. And you look around the small room, a low wooden bench, a narrow slit window letting in a thin ribbon of moonlight, a few scattered rushes, flattened beneath the boots of countless men before you. And you begin to realize how these guards stole bits of warmth where they could, not for comfort but for survival, because no matter how fierce you were with a spear, cold was the enemy that never slept. You lower yourself onto the bench, the straw-thin padding barely enough to soften the hard stone beneath, and you tuck your hands under your arms the same way soldiers have done for hundreds of years, letting your breath warm the wool of your cloak. And in that small gesture, you feel the first fragile barrier between you and the winter beyond the walls. A reminder that medieval life was not about defeating the cold, but negotiating with it, learning when to move, when to rest, and how to sleep without slipping too far into the numbness that could steal fingers, toes, or entire men before dawn. You close your eyes for a moment, the draft whispering along the wall like something alive, and you begin to settle into the rhythm of the tower, the faint hum of wind through the arrow slits, the gentle creak of wooden beams shifting under their own weight, and the soft heartbeat in your chest that reminds you that even in a world this cold, your body is trying, quietly, stubbornly, to keep you alive. As you settle deeper into the watchroom, you begin to notice the smallest movements of air brushing against your skin, thin threads of cold slipping through cracks in the stone, as if the castle itself were quietly breathing. And you understand why medieval guards spoke of drafts the way sailors spoke of storms, because a draft was not just a breeze but a constant whisper of winter that slithered through the walls, curling around ankles and sliding beneath cloaks with icy fingers, never strong enough to knock you down but persistent enough to wear you away, hour after hour, until the cold felt like a presence sitting beside you. You shift your weight slightly, and feel that familiar sensation of regret as your shoulder brushes against the bare stone wall, colder than anything you have touched tonight, so cold it feels alive, and you pull away quickly, muttering a tired curse just as countless guards did before you, because these stones were meant to block armies, not wind, and whatever warmth they absorbed during the day has long since drained away into the dark, leaving the walls sweating with moisture that chills the air around you like the breath of a cavern. You sink lower, pulling your hood over your ears, and you can feel the draft crawling along your neck, slipping beneath the collar of your tunic like a thief, searching for something to steal. And you begin to understand why guards stuffed moss or scraps of wool into cracks between stones, why soot marks appear in corners where no hearth was ever meant to burn, why even the strictest captains quietly ignored certain fires lit against regulations, because the choice was simple: bend the rules or lose men to the cold before an arrow ever touched them. The smell of the room shifts as the wind changes direction: damp straw, the faint sourness of last week's spilled ale, the earthy scent of rushes that have not been changed in months. And these smells blend into the midnight air in a way that feels oddly comforting, not because they are pleasant, but because they are familiar, grounding you the way a heavy blanket does, even when it scratches your skin, reminding you that you are not outside in the open, but within the castle's protective shell, thin and drafty as it may be. You curl tighter beneath your cloak, pressing your knees toward your chest, and listen to the pattern of the wind, that soft rise and fall that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, sliding along the arrow slit with a sound like a distant flute, hissing faintly through the gaps in the door, brushing the rushes so gently that they rustle against one another like insects shifting in their sleep. And with each gust you feel your body wake just a little, a brief shiver that pulls you back from the edge of deeper rest, as if the cold itself is determined to keep you half aware. And yet, in that half-sleeping, half-waking state, you begin to sense something else, the rhythm of life in the castle around you, faint but steady, the bark of a dog far below as someone tends to the stables, the dull thud of a heavy pot being placed on a kitchen stone, the muted hum of guards on the outer wall stamping their feet to keep blood flowing, and this rhythm becomes your company, the quiet reassurance that even though you feel alone in this small chamber, the castle breathes with you, shares the night with you, and watches over your exhausted form as surely as you watch over it. Your eyes grow heavy again, the draft now just another texture in the air, and you let your body sink into the simple bedding beneath you, that thin layer of flattened rushes on hard stone that somehow feels softer the more tired you become. And as your breathing slows, you understand why guards learn to sleep in these brief, fragile intervals, because to fight the cold constantly would have drained them completely, but to surrender entirely would have meant never waking. So they lived in a delicate balance where sleep came in shallow waves, drifting just close enough to rest, but never far enough to be lost. And in that dim, flickering light of the watchroom, wrapped in your cloak, listening to the cold whisper through cracks in the stone, you begin to drift again, not into warmth but into a comfortable kind of numbness, where the draft becomes predictable, the cold becomes familiar, and the castle's breath becomes your lullaby. You wake again, not fully and not suddenly, but in that gentle drifting way that happens when your body senses cold creeping a little too close, and as your eyes blink open in the faint silver light coming through the arrow slit, you reach instinctively for the layers wrapped around you, the familiar weight of wool and linen that medieval people relied on far more than fires or blankets, because in a world without central heating, what you wore was not merely clothing, but your first line of defense against the night, and you begin to feel the textures the way a tired guard would, the scratch of coarse wool at the back of your neck, the softer linen clinging slightly to your skin, the heavy cloak pressing down like a tired hand, each layer working quietly to trap the warmth your own body struggles to produce. You tighten the cloak around you, pulling it up over your chin until only the tip of your nose peeks out, and as you breathe you feel the warm air collecting beneath the fabric, slowly building a pocket of heat that spreads just enough to relax your shivering muscles, and you realize why guards rarely undressed to sleep, why boots stayed on, why belts were loosened but never removed, because removing even one layer was an invitation for the cold to pour through every seam, slipping under armor the same way it slipped between stones, and a man who tried sleeping in only his shirt would have woken with his bones aching long before dawn. You imagine yourself dressed the way a real guard might have been, a linen undertunic that still carries the faint scent of lye from washing, a thick woolen tunic over it with fibers stiff from smoke and sweat, a cloak so heavy it feels almost like a small tent wrapped around your shoulders, hood pulled low, boots stuffed with dry straw to insulate against frost rising from the stone floor, and perhaps even a second cloak if you were lucky or of higher rank, because layering was not fashion here but survival, a simple, almost elegant trick that turned your own body into a furnace. As you shift on the straw mattress, you hear the faint creak of leather straps rubbing against one another, the soft rasp of rough cloth folding under your weight. And these sounds blend together like a slow lullaby, small reminders that the layers protecting you are alive with textures, smells, and memories of long days guarding gates or walking battlements. And each garment you wear tells a quiet story, the wool that smells faintly of sheep and smoke from last night's brazier, the linen that still carries the ghost of river water where it was rinsed, the leather hardened by years of cold nights and long marches. Your breath fogs slightly in the cold air, drifting like soft smoke before fading, and you nestle deeper under your cloak, feeling the comforting pressure of layered fabric pressing against your arms like a warm, familiar weight, and you understand why soldiers cherished their clothing almost as much as their weapons, why a well-kept cloak was considered essential gear, why some men folded their spare tunics into makeshift pillows, not for softness but to add yet another layer between themselves and the icy breath of the stone beneath them. You think about the inequality among guards, how a wealthy knight's retainer might sleep wrapped in a heavy fur-lined cloak while another soldier might huddle under patched fabric, barely thick enough to keep out the night, and you picture the two lying side by side, breathing the same frozen air, hearing the same wind sigh through the arrow slits, yet feeling the cold in entirely different ways, one drifting off with relative comfort, while the other chases warmth inch by inch, layer by layer, pulling his thin cloak tighter until it covers his ears and nose. And as your own breathing grows slower, steadier, you begin to feel the quiet intimacy of those shared nights, the unspoken understanding among guards that warmth was not a luxury but a resource, one they borrowed from each other without shame, shifting closer on narrow bedding, hands tucked into sleeves, cloaks overlapping like shields, because survival in a medieval tower had little room for pride, and the difference between a miserable night and a tolerable one often came down to how well you layered your garments, and how close you allowed another guard to rest beside you. The wind hums again at the window, that soft, familiar moan of air squeezing through narrow stone, but this time it doesn't pull you fully awake, because your layers hold the warmth just long enough, just tightly enough, that the cold feels like something distant, something that belongs to the tower but not entirely to you. And in that heavy half-sleep you drift again, wrapped in the quiet, scratchy comfort of wool and linen, the castle watching over you as slowly, gently, you fade back toward rest. You shift in your sleep, slowly becoming aware that something heavier than wool rests across your hips, something softer on one side and rougher on the other, and as your fingers brush against it you realize you are lying beneath a pelt, an animal skin pulled over your body the way medieval guards so often did when linen and wool were no longer enough to keep out the cold, and there is something ancient and instinctive in that sensation, the weight of a hide that once belonged to a living creature whose warmth lingers faintly in its fibers, wrapping you as though nature itself has draped an arm around your shoulders to protect you from the long winter night. You breathe in slowly, and the scent rises into the cold air, a mix of lanolin from sheep's wool, a faint musk from deer hide, a hint of smoke absorbed during countless nights near a brazier. And this smell, though strong and earthy, feels strangely comforting, a reminder that the world outside the stone walls still pulses with life, and that warmth, even in its most primitive form, can be borrowed, preserved and used to carry a tired guard through the darkest hours before dawn. You picture, through sleepy eyelids, how these pelts would have been obtained, some taken from herds kept near the castle, others traded from hunters who roamed deep forests, and a few seized from fallen enemies whose cloaks, lined with fox or wolf, became trophies repurposed for survival rather than display, and the variety of these furs created a hierarchy of comfort among guards, the fortunate ones wrapped in thick bear or wolf pelts, the less fortunate lying beneath stiff deer skins not fully cured, and the poorest tucked under scraps of hide pieced together like a patchwork shield against the cold. As your hand moves across the pelt, you feel the contrast between its two sides, the warm, scratchy wool facing your body, trapping heat like a miniature hearth, and the smoother leather side facing outward, stiffened slightly from the cold and the wear of many nights, and that dual texture becomes part of your dreamlike state, grounding you in the reality of this medieval chamber where softness was rare and warmth was something earned, not given. The pelt's weight presses gently on your chest, heavy enough to hold you in place, almost anchoring you to the bedding beneath as the cold air swirls above, and you imagine guards huddled under such skins, sometimes sharing a single hide between two men, shoulders touching, breaths mixing in clouds that drifted upward and disappeared into the darkness. And there is a quiet dignity in that image, not luxury, not comfort, but survival built from whatever the land provided. Your mind drifts to a curious thought that medieval chroniclers often mentioned, that some guards would drape half-cured pelts directly over their bodies, still smelling of the hunt, still rough and stiff along the edges, simply because even imperfect warmth was better than none. And you imagine the texture of such a hide, slightly oily, faintly metallic in scent, carrying traces of the animal's final days, and how strange it must have felt to sleep beneath something so raw and real. Yet how grateful a freezing guard would have been for that crude blanket. You curl deeper beneath your imagined hide, letting it settle around you like a soft shell, and you picture the guard room around you, dimly lit by the fading glow of a single ember, the walls cold and damp, the night air seeping through cracks in thin, steady breaths, and yet beneath the pelt you feel protected, cocooned in a warmth that seems to pulse gently with each inhale and exhale, reminding you that even in the harshest environments, people found ways to soften the edges of the world. A faint sound echoes somewhere beyond the tower wall, perhaps a dog barking at a fox or a stable door shifting in the wind, but the pelt muffles it, turning sharp noises into muted tremors, and in that muffled world, the castle's bitter cold becomes a distant problem, something waiting outside your temporary sanctuary of fur and warmth. And your eyelids grow heavy once more as you allow the weight of the hide to guide you back into that drifting, dreamlike state where breath fogs softly, and the stone beneath you feels less like ice and more like part of the night's rhythm. And as you drift, wrapped in borrowed warmth, you begin to understand why guards treasured these pelts not just as bedding but as shields against the silence, the darkness and the relentless winter breathing at the door. Because beneath a heavy hide, even in the coldest tower room, a man could finally surrender to a few hours of fragile, precious sleep. You shift again in your sleep, this time against something that rustles softly beneath you, a crinkling, uneven surface that releases a faint scent of earth and dried grass. And as your fingers brush through it, you realize you are lying on one of the most common and humble sleeping arrangements medieval guards ever knew. A bed of rushes, straw, or hay spread loosely across a wooden plank. more often directly onto the cold stone floor, and though it is far from comfortable by modern standards, there is a simplicity to it that feels strangely reassuring in the darkness of a drafty tower room. The smell rises as you move, a blend of dried stalks, faint traces of dust, a whisper of old ale spilled who knows how many nights ago, and a subtle dampness absorbed from the cold stone beneath. And these smells, though rough and unrefined, become part of the sensory cocoon surrounding you, a reminder that medieval life was built from whatever the earth offered, and that warmth often came from materials so simple you might overlook them today. You press your hand deeper into the straw, feeling its coarse texture prick lightly against your skin, uneven and slightly brittle, yet surprisingly warm because each hollow stalk traps air, creating tiny pockets of insulation that keep your body lifted away from the freezing ground. And you begin to understand why guards insisted on refreshing these rushes whenever possible, replacing damp bundles with dry ones to prevent mold, and to reclaim just a little more warmth from the unforgiving night. The bedding shifts with every breath you take, crunching softly as your weight redistributes, and the sound becomes a kind of quiet rhythm beneath you, a rustic lullaby that blends with the faint whistle of the wind through the arrow slit, the distant clank of a chain being checked on the drawbridge, and the soft scurrying of a rat or mouse moving cautiously along the wall, all of these sounds merging into a tapestry of nighttime life inside a medieval castle, a world that never falls fully silent, even when its guards try to sleep. You imagine how this bedding was prepared. Bundles of straw gathered from nearby fields after harvest, tied loosely with twine, dragged up narrow staircases by tired men whose arms already ached from carrying water or firewood, and then spread in uneven layers across the stone, forming a crude but essential barrier between flesh and cold. And you picture the guard you replaced, shifting the same handfuls of straw just a few hours before, flattening a small hollow where his body lay curled against the chill, leaving behind faint impressions that your own form now settles into. The more you sink into the bedding, the more you feel the small variations. Clumps of straw where the stalks have bunched together, thin patches where the stone presses closer, soft dips where countless guards have lain in almost the same position night after night, each one leaving behind a silent memory of their presence that becomes part of the bed's uneven landscape, a subtle reminder of how many lives this simple layer of rushes has warmed, however imperfectly, through the long winters of the castle. Your breath fogs slightly above the straw, rising in faint clouds that disappear almost instantly, and as you pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, you begin to understand something deeply human about this crude bedding. That comfort for medieval guards did not come from softness but from insulation, from the knowledge that just a few inches of dried grass could mean the difference between waking cold and waking numb, between enduring the night and surrendering to it. You shift again, letting the straw mold gently around your hip and shoulder, creating small pockets where warmth gathers, and you imagine how guards sometimes added anything they could find to improve the bedding: bits of cloth, scraps of old tunics, handfuls of moss, even dry leaves collected from the castle courtyard, small gestures that turned a harsh stone floor into something barely approaching a mattress. And you feel the quiet ingenuity of those efforts, the way necessity shaped every decision in this tower room. Outside, a gust of wind pushes through the arrow slit, brushing across your face with a thin, icy tongue, and you burrow deeper into the straw, letting its uneven warmth surround you once more. And in that moment you sense how these simple materials, dried grass, discarded rushes, scraps of cloth, formed a fragile but dependable sanctuary for guards who had no better luxury to rely on. Your eyes grow heavy, your limbs relax, and the straw shifts beneath you in a soft, familiar crackle, almost like the sound of a distant campfire, and you let that sound carry you slowly back into the haze of sleep, wrapped in nothing more than layers of cloth, a worn pelt, and a humble bed of dried stalks that has cradled countless winters before you. You drift awake again, not because of a sound, but because the cold has shifted ever so slightly around you, tightening its grip along your back where the straw has thinned, loosening near your chest where your cloak has trapped a pocket of warmth. And as your eyes flutter open, you notice a faint orange glow trembling in the far corner of the room, nothing more than the last breath of a small brazier left behind by the guard who slept here before you. A single ember pulsing quietly like the heartbeat of the tower itself. You push yourself up slightly, feeling the brittle straw crackle beneath your elbow, and your gaze settles on the brazier, just a shallow metal bowl set atop a rough stand, filled with darkened coals that have nearly surrendered to the night, yet still holding enough warmth to tint the air nearest to them with a whisper of heat. The kind of fragile warmth that cannot fill a room but can keep fingers from stiffening or give a man courage before lying back down to sleep. And you imagine how important this tiny fire must have been to weary guards shivering through endless winter watches. You approach it in your mind, careful not to wake yourself fully, and you picture the way the ember glows brighter for a moment, when a gust of cold air slips under the door, the draft feeding it a thin breath of oxygen before letting it fade again into the soft red glow of dying flame. And you understand how medieval soldiers would hover around such braziers, rubbing their hands together, turning slowly to warm their backs, soaking in every scrap of heat before returning to their posts. Because fire was not merely warmth but survival, a small defiant star burning in a world of frozen stone. You ease your body back onto the bedding, and imagine how 2 or 3 guards might gather around the brazier in shifts, the lucky ones warming themselves while the others patrolled the outer walls, their breath freezing in the air as they walked. And you picture the quiet camaraderie of those moments, the murmured conversations, the jokes exchanged in tired whispers, the rough hands extended toward the glow, fingers trembling as numbness slowly thawed, simple, fleeting comforts that meant everything when the night stretched long and bitter. You think for a moment about how fire was both a blessing and a risk, how captains sometimes forbade flames in the towers, because embers could catch on old wood or straw and turn a watchroom into a chimney of smoke and panic. Yet despite the rules, guards still lit these little braziers when they could, trusting that the warmth they offered outweighed the danger, and the soot marks discovered centuries later in hidden corners of castle walls stand as quiet evidence of these small rebellions against the cold. Your thoughts drift now to another source of warmth, one far simpler and more instinctive, the warmth of other men sleeping near you, bodies curled together in narrow spaces where pride had no place, shoulders touching, legs overlapping, breath mingling in the frigid air, because in a medieval tower room the human body itself became a hearth, and guards relied on one another, just as they relied on their cloaks or the fire, sharing heat the way one might share bread or water, knowing that survival was in many ways a collective effort. You imagine lying shoulder to shoulder with another guard, both of you wrapped tightly in wool cloaks, the pelt thrown over both bodies like a shared shield against the cold, your breaths creating faint clouds that drift upward and vanish into the darkness. And there is something deeply human in that quiet closeness, something unspoken and ancient, the understanding that warmth is a resource best shared, and that no man survived a medieval winter alone. As your body settles again, you think about how many small sources of heat existed in such a place. The ember in the brazier, the warmth of another guard, the trapped air between layers of wool, the faint insulation of straw beneath you, and even the slow heat of your own breath gathering beneath your cloak. And these scattered details, fragile on their own, wove together into a patchwork of survival, a delicate balance that kept exhaustion from becoming fatal and allowed guards to sleep, however lightly, in rooms that would otherwise have been uninhabitable. You close your eyes once more, feeling the imagined glow of the dying ember warming the cold air near your face, and with that faint warmth in mind you drift again towards sleep, letting the tower's darkness fold around you like a heavy cloak, knowing that for a few more moments you are safe, sheltered by fire, fabric, and the simple heat of being human in a place where warmth was the rarest of luxuries. You stir again, your eyes opening just enough to sense the subtle shift in the tower's atmosphere. The cold no longer quite as sharp, the darkness not quite as heavy, and you realize that time has passed, though you cannot say how much, because, in a medieval guard room, sleep comes not in deep heavy stretches, but in thin, fragile fragments stitched between duties, and as you slowly push yourself upright, the straw quietly protesting beneath your weight, you remember the unspoken rhythm that governed every soldier's night. The rotation of watches, the constant exchange between wakefulness and rest, the delicate balance that kept exhaustion from swallowing entire garrisons whole. You picture the rotation clearly now, as if watching it unfold before you, one guard pacing the ramparts, stamping his feet to force warmth back into his legs, swinging his arms in slow circles to chase the numbness from his fingers, eyes lifted to the starless winter sky. Another guard seated on the bench near the dying brazier, rubbing his hands together and leaning just far enough forward to feel the ember's last breath of heat. And a third guard, you curled beneath wool and fur, stealing a thin sliver of rest before the next shift calls your name. Each man living within the same narrow loop of cold movement and shallow sleep. You settle your back against the wall and feel the familiar shock of icy stones seeping through your layers, and you pull away instinctively, letting your cloak fall forward like a curtain between you and the wall's unyielding chill. And this small gesture reminds you why guards rarely slept deeply. The cold, the drafts, the discomfort, the thin bedding, the ever-present need to wake quickly when footsteps echoed on the spiral staircase, or when the horn sounded from the gatehouse below. You imagine those footsteps now, slow, steady, echoing through the stairwell as the next guard climbs to relieve you. And though the sound is faint in your mind, you can almost hear the heavy boots thudding against the spiraling steps, each footfall carrying the weight of fatigue, duty, and resignation. And you picture the man stepping into the doorway with his cloak pulled up, breath fogging in front of his face, eyes rimmed with the sleepless certainty that his next hours will be spent fighting winter rather than enemies. In that imagined moment, you see how the guards exchange only a few words, a quiet nod, a brief whisper, a tired warning like keep moving, or the wind's worse along the north wall, because in this bitter environment camaraderie exists, not in long conversations but in small, meaningful fragments shared between men who understand survival, the same way fishermen understand tides. You pull your cloak tighter as you imagine stepping out for your own rotation, your boots touching the frosted stones of the battlement, the wind instantly wrapping around your face like a wet cloth dipped in ice, and you see yourself pacing slowly but steadily, breath streaming behind you in pale clouds, your hands tucked into your sleeves, your cloak billowing in the wind like a dark flag, and each step becomes part of a ritual performed hundreds of times every night across castle walls all over medieval Europe. Then you imagine returning to the tower room after your shift, body aching, fingers stiff, face numb, shoulders heavy from battling the cold, and as you push the door open, the warmth, however faint, seems almost miraculous, the dying ember glowing like a promise, the thick air inside holding the slightest memory of heat and human presence, and your fellow guard lifting the pelt to make space for you as you collapse once again onto the straw bedding, grateful for even a few moments of shallow, dream-laced sleep. That rotation, that rhythm of moving from cold to slightly less cold, from wakefulness to half-sleep, from pacing the walls to burrowing beneath pelts and straw, becomes the heartbeat of the tower, a fragile cadence that keeps the castle alive through the darkest hours. And you understand now that medieval guards did not sleep to feel rested. They slept simply to avoid collapse, taking whatever slivers of restoration they could gather between duties. You lie back down, easing into the shallow hollow shaped by the guard before you, and close your eyes as the imaginary footsteps fade. The wind hums through the arrow slit once more, and the thin line between waking and sleeping softens again, drawing you slowly into the drifting quiet where the castle, the cold, and your breath all move together in one long, unbroken night. You lie still for a moment, letting your breath settle, and as your eyes open just enough to adjust to the dim glow fading from the brazier, you notice something that has been beside you all along, the silhouette of a spear leaning against the wall, the faint outline of a sword resting near the bedding. Tools of war set within arm's reach, not because an enemy army was expected tonight, but because in a medieval fortress danger always slept lightly, and a guard could never be entirely sure whether he would wake only to cold or to the sound of steel being drawn somewhere in the darkness. You shift onto your side, the straw rustling beneath you in a dry murmur, and your gaze drifts toward the spearhead, catching the tiniest glimmer of moonlight from the arrow slit above, its metal dulled from use, yet still sharp enough to remind you that even sleep was a guarded luxury, a fragile truce between exhaustion and duty, and the knowledge that you must always be ready to rise at a moment's notice kept you from sinking too deeply into dreams. You imagine yourself reaching for that spear if needed, your fingers stiff from cold, fumbling for the wooden shaft before your senses fully awaken, and the thought alone is enough to make you tighten your grip on the pelt wrapped around your body, because warmth, sleep, and readiness lived in constant tension here, each one stealing something from the other, each one essential in ways that medieval life never allowed you to forget. Outside the tower room, the wind shifts again, brushing through the arrow slits with a long, hollow sigh that sounds almost like a distant voice calling across stone corridors, and in that eerie moment you understand why guards sometimes slept with one boot still on, one hand resting near the hilt of their sword, minds trained to escape sleep quickly if the castle stirred with signs of trouble, a creak that wasn't the wind, a clang that wasn't the gate chain, footsteps that didn't match the expected rhythm of the changing watch. You picture those nights when alarms were real, when a messenger climbed the stairs breathless from running across the courtyard, slamming his fist against the wooden door, shouting for the tower guard to wake, because someone had been spotted near the forest line or a suspicious fire flickered beyond the walls. And you imagine yourself jolting upright from shallow sleep, cloak falling off your shoulders, heart thudding in your chest as the cold snaps at your skin like a startled animal. But tonight, the castle is quiet. The sword beside you lies undisturbed, its leather scabbard creaking softly as the straw shifts with your breathing, and the spear remains leaning against the wall like a loyal dog waiting to be called upon. Patient and silent, and the stillness of these objects brings you an unexpected comfort, the reassurance that for now your enemy is only the cold, a dangerous foe but a predictable one. You stretch your legs beneath the pelt, feeling the stiffness in your calves from earlier patrols, and your foot brushes the wooden haft of the spear, its surface smooth from countless hands, polished not by oil or care, but by years of necessity, and the touch reminds you that every guard before you slept the same way, never fully at peace, never fully surrendered to dreams, always balanced on the thin edge of vigilance, even when wrapped in layers of wool and straw. You let your gaze drift to the sword again, the faintest silver line along its edge glowing in the moonlight, and there is something soothing in its presence, an odd feeling that even if the castle walls are cold and drafty, you are not unprotected, not entirely vulnerable, because the tools of your duty remain close, lying quietly beside your bedding like silent guardians watching over you as you drift in and out of sleep. The wind hums again, softer this time, and your eyelids grow heavy once more as your hand settles near the edge of the straw, close enough to touch your weapon if needed, but far enough that your body can relax, and as you exhale into the cold air, you finally feel the strange harmony of medieval rest, part soldier, part sleeper, part sentinel, part dreamer, suspended between danger and exhaustion, in a chamber where even a few minutes of shallow sleep feel like a gift. You curl deeper beneath the pelt, listening to the castle's slow nocturnal breathing, and you allow yourself to drift once more, knowing that tomorrow night will be much the same, and the next, because in a medieval fortress the cold was eternal, danger was constant, and sleep came only in fragile pieces, yet somehow those pieces were enough to keep a guard standing when dawn's pale light finally crept across the battlements. You lie there for a long moment, eyes half closed, wrapped in your layers, and the faint warmth left in the straw and pelt beneath you. And as your breathing steadies, you begin to notice the sounds around you, not sharp or startling, but soft, patient, and rhythmic. The quiet soundtrack of a medieval castle at night, a mixture of whispers and murmurs that, oddly enough, helped guards fall asleep, even in the most uncomfortable conditions, because in a place where silence meant danger, sound was its own kind of comfort. You listen to the wind first, the way it threads through the arrow slits with that thin, wavering note, almost like a flute played by a tired ghost drifting along the stone walls, changing pitch ever so slightly each time the breeze shifts direction, and this lonely melody becomes part of the air you breathe, weaving itself into your drowsiness until it feels less like a threat and more like a companion who has kept countless guards company long before you arrived. Then you hear the faint creak of timber, wooden beams settling as the cold presses harder against the outer walls, the drawbridge shifting slightly on its chains, the distant groan of a stable door bumping against its frame, and these sounds carry a gentle reassurance, reminding you that life continues throughout the castle, even when most souls are asleep, that the world around you is not an empty void, but a living structure breathing alongside you. Somewhere far below, perhaps in the kitchen or near the storerooms, a pot is moved, the sound muffled by layers of stone but still distinct enough to reach your ears as a soft metallic thud, and you picture a sleepy cook checking the banked fire or a servant adjusting something left out earlier in the evening, their quiet actions becoming part of the slow nightly rhythm that rises through floors and stairwells like warm air in reverse. You shift slightly, sinking deeper into the straw, and your movement disturbs a tiny rustle near the wall. Perhaps a mouse or a rat, its nails tapping lightly against the stone as it scurries in search of crumbs. And though such creatures are unwelcome, their presence is familiar, almost expected. Another small reminder that the castle is never fully still, never fully silent, never fully devoid of life, even in the deepest hours of winter. Your breath grows slower as the sounds blend together, wind, wood, faint footsteps somewhere distant, the rustle of hay beneath you, and you realize how these overlapping noises could lull a guard into sleep, not because they were soothing in a cozy way, but because they created a predictable pattern, a background hum that told him the castle was stable, safe for the moment, alive in its own quiet manner. Even the echoes from the courtyard below reach you as soft, round vibrations rather than sharp noises. A horse shifting in its stall, hooves thudding gently against packed earth, a guard coughing near the gatehouse, a chain scraping as someone checks a latch, and each sound, though separated by floors of stone and layers of cold air, carries the calm reassurance that others are awake, that the burden of vigilance is shared, that sleep, however thin, is allowed. You close your eyes again, letting these sounds wash over you like a slow tide, and you think about how many guards must have drifted into and out of dreams, guided by this same nighttime orchestra. Men curled in cloaks, men pacing the walls, men resting their heads on their arms, while listening to wind and stone, each one finding comfort not in silence, but in the gentle, persistent murmur of a fortress alive. You inhale the faint scent of straw, wool, cold air, and old stone, and as your lungs fill, the sounds fade slightly, becoming a soft blanket around your mind, something so constant that it loses its edges and becomes a kind of warm darkness, and you feel your thoughts loosen, drifting like smoke, slipping slowly into that quiet state between waking and dreaming that every guard knew so well. Somewhere far below, a dog barks, once, sharp, alert, and then falls silent again, and this brief spike of sound is enough to stir a small instinct in your chest, that eternal reminder that danger always lurks at the edges of the cold. But when no follow-up alarm comes, your breath steadies again, and the castle resumes its slow nocturnal breathing. drawing you deeper into rest. And as you surrender once more to that drifting heaviness, the sounds of the castle settle around you like layers of invisible fabric, thin, worn, familiar, guiding you gently into another pocket of sleep, one more small, precious moment of rest carved out of the long, freezing night. You drift somewhere between sleep and waking, for what feels like a long, shapeless stretch of time, your body curled beneath the pelt, your face buried in the rough wool of your cloak, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the air around you begins to change. Not warmer exactly, but lighter, carrying a faint clarity that hints at the coming of dawn, that thin, pale breath of morning that medieval guards recognized long before any rooster crowed or church bell rang. You shift slightly, and the straw beneath you responds with a soft crunch, the pelt sliding a little off your shoulder, letting a thread of cold air slip underneath and brush your skin like an icy fingertip. And without opening your eyes, you instinctively pull the pelt back up, curling deeper into your makeshift nest. Because the last hours before sunrise are often the coldest, the time when even the bravest guards fought against a bone-deep exhaustion that felt heavier than armor. You breathe in, and the air tastes different now. Not quite as stagnant, carrying the faintest hint of something fresh, perhaps the distant smell of wet earth beyond the walls, or the subtle shift in temperature as night slowly loosens its hold on the world, and you imagine the sky outside beginning to pale, a soft grey spreading across the horizon, while the castle remains wrapped in darkness, waiting for the first thin rays to slip through its narrow slits. The brazier in the corner has gone completely dark, its last ember extinguished sometime while you slept, leaving only a faint scent of soot in the air, a reminder of warmth now gone. And as you lie there, you understand why guards dreaded this stretch of night. The fire had died, the warmth of bodies had drifted away, as men shifted restlessly, and the stone walls, which had seemed merely cold a few hours ago, now radiated a deeper chill that seeped beneath even the thickest layers. You open your eyes a little, adjusting to the soft bluish hue creeping into the room, and you notice the spear still leaning where it was, the sword still beside the bedding, silent companions awaiting the moment when the new shift climbs the stairs, and their stillness gives you a strange comfort, as if they too are tired from the long winter night, resting in anticipation of the day's first watch. You picture the other guards elsewhere in the castle, one patrolling the outer wall with heavy steps, breath fogging behind him like smoke, another sitting slumped near a doorway, fighting the overwhelming temptation to close his eyes, another at the gatehouse rubbing his hands together before gripping the wooden lever that controls the drawbridge, each man bound by the same rhythm, all waiting for the sun to rise just enough to bring the slightest relief. You hear a faint noise from below, the soft thud of a bucket set down near the well, maybe the castle servants beginning to stir, moving quietly through shadowed corridors to light the first kitchen fires, and that sound becomes the earliest sign that the long night is finally ending, the world slowly waking, even if the sun has not yet fully lifted itself above the battlements. Your breathing slows again as you listen to these distant hints of morning, the creak of a door, the muffled whinny of a horse shifting in its stall, the faint sweep of someone clearing snow or frost from a stone step, and each sound carries with it a tiny thread of warmth, a promise that light is on the way, that the icy grip of the night will soon loosen, if only for a few precious hours. You let your body sink once more into the straw, knowing that this last pocket of sleep is perhaps the sweetest, because it comes with the reassurance that your shift will soon end, that another guard will climb the stairs, stamping snow or frost from his boots, muttering sleepily as he takes your place, and for a moment the thought of handing over your spear feels like the softest dream imaginable. The wind sighs gently through the arrow slit, no longer sharp but weary, as if it too has grown tired of prowling through the castle all night, and in that softened wind you hear the world exhale, preparing itself for the slow arrival of dawn, and your eyelids grow heavy again, ready to slip into one last gentle drift before footsteps echo up the spiral stairs to rouse you. and so you curl tighter beneath the pelt, the cold pressing at your back, but not quite reaching the warmth you've built beneath your layers, and you allow yourself to slide back into a shallow, lingering rest, knowing that the hardest part of the night has passed, and that soon, very soon, the first faint glow of sunrise will touch the stone walls and remind you that even the coldest castle nights eventually give way to morning. You're drifting again, suspended between the last shadows of night and the pale breath of dawn, when a distant sound reaches you, not loud, not urgent, but steady, deliberate, unmistakable, the rhythmic echo of boots climbing the spiral staircase, each step landing with the weight of someone who would rather still be in bed, someone who has fought off sleep just enough to take your place on the tower watch, and as the footsteps draw closer, you feel a quiet sense of relief settle through your tired limbs. You do not move at first, you simply lie there beneath the pelt, eyes half closed, listening to the slow ascent, the scrape of leather soles against worn stone, the faint rattle of a belt buckle brushing against a rough tunic, and you imagine the guard climbing toward you, cloak pulled tightly around his shoulders, hood drawn low over his brow, his breath streaming ahead of him like a misty banner as he ascends through the cold column of air that coils inside the stairwell. You know exactly what he feels, because you felt the same hours ago, that heavy reluctance, the sting of cold air seeping beneath the layers, the dull ache in the fingers, and the hope that perhaps the man above has kept some ember alive in the brazier, leaving behind even the slightest pocket of warmth. The footsteps pause briefly, perhaps as he adjusts his cloak or leans against the wall for support, and then continue, spiraling upward until at last you hear the soft thud of a knuckle tapping on the wooden door, not forcefully, not loudly, just enough to let you know he is there, fulfilling the ritual that has been repeated through long winters for centuries. You slowly open your eyes, the faint morning light brushing across your vision, and push yourself up from the straw, the pelt sliding from your shoulders with a soft, leathery sigh, the cold rushing in immediately to claim the warmth you've built through the night. And even though you expect it, the shock still bites with the sharpness of a winter gust. You sit for a moment on the edge of the bedding, rubbing your arms, blinking away the last remnants of sleep. And in that fragile transition between lying down and standing, you feel the exhaustion of the night settle into your bones, not painful, but heavy, a deep, ancient weariness that medieval guards knew well, the kind that comes not from fighting battles but simply from surviving the long hours of darkness. The door creaks open, and the guard steps inside, bringing with him a faint swirl of colder air from the stairwell, his cloak dusted with frost, his face flushed from the climb, and he offers you a tired nod, not cheerful, not formal, but respectful in that quiet way shared by men who depend on each other to endure the winter. You rise slowly, gripping the wall briefly for balance, and reach for your cloak, brushing away bits of straw clinging to the wool, and your fingers graze the cold metal of the spear still leaning beside the bedding, its shaft chilled by the night, and you lift it gently, feeling its familiar weight settle into your palm. You hand over your post with only a few words, short, practical, shaped more by cold lips than by ceremony. Wind seeps worse from the north. The embers died an hour ago, the straw sits still dry, and the other guard nods, absorbing the information the same way men inherit a burden, quietly, without complaint, knowing that the night he will face tomorrow will be much the same. You step toward the door, the cold rising from the stairwell brushing against your ankles, but the knowledge that your shift is over, that warmth and rest await you below, carries you forward, giving you just enough strength to begin the descent. Each step downward releases a bit of tension from your body, the stone beneath your boots still cold, the air still sharp, but the promise of a small fire, thicker blankets, and perhaps even warm broth waiting in the lower chambers, softens the bite of the morning chill, and you feel your muscles loosen slightly as you descend deeper into the castle. Behind you, the guard settles into your place, pulling the pelt over his shoulders, adjusting the straw beneath him, leaning the spear within easy reach, and the quiet rotation continues, just as it has for countless winters, a simple, unbroken chain of men trading places in the eternal rhythm of night, cold and watchfulness. And as you move lower and the air grows a little less biting, a little more alive, you feel the first stirrings of the castle waking around you. The faint clatter of pots, the low murmur of servants lighting fires, the distant crackle of wood catching flame, signals that daylight, warmth, and life are slowly returning, and with them the fragile comfort that medieval guards cherished more than anything, the knowledge that they had made it through another night. You begin your descent slowly, one hand gliding along the cold stone wall for balance, the narrow spiral staircase wrapping around you like the inside of a seashell carved from winter itself, and with each step downward the air shifts, not warm yet but less razor-sharp, carrying a faint, distant hint of smoke that drifts upward from the lower floors where someone has begun coaxing the first morning fire into life. Your boots thud softly on the worn steps, the leather stiff, the soles almost numb from hours of contact with frozen stone, and as you move deeper into the castle's belly you feel the exhaustion settle more heavily across your shoulders, as though the warmth below is gently tugging you closer, drawing you out of the bitter night, one slow exhale at a time. The stairwell echoes faintly with the tiny sounds of morning, an early servant dragging a water bucket, the muffled clang of kitchen tools being arranged, the flutter of a torch being relit by a bleary-eyed attendant, and these distant noises form a soft, familiar welcome, an invitation to leave behind the harshness of the tower and step back into the living world that stirs within the castle walls. You turn the final bend of the staircase, and the faintest glow reaches you, a flicker of orange light slipping under the heavy wooden door ahead, and when you push it open the hinges groan softly, releasing a breath of warmer air into your face, tinged with the comforting smell of burning oak and damp wool drying near the hearth below. You step into the lower chamber, a modest room with rough wooden benches, a cracked pottery cup left on the table, and a small fire crackling steadily in the hearth, and the heat meets you with gentle surprise, touching your cheeks, thawing the stiffness in your hands, soothing the ache deep in your legs like a warm hand placed against cold skin. You move closer to the fire, holding your palms toward the flames, feeling your fingers prickle sharply as warmth returns to them, little sparks of sensation dancing along your knuckles, and though the fire is small, it feels luxurious after the bitter wind at the top of the tower, the kind of warmth that spreads slowly through your cloak, through your tunic, through your tired bones. A few other guards sit nearby, some already drifting half asleep on benches, heads heavy, boots still laced, cloaks wrapped tightly around them like cocoons, and you can sense the shared fatigue in the room, the unspoken bond between men who survived the night together, even if they hadn't spoken a word to one another. One of them looks up briefly, eyes dull with exhaustion, and offers you a faint nod, a wordless greeting that says more than conversation ever could, acknowledging the hardship you've just endured and the relief you're stepping into now. You lower yourself onto a bench, the wooden surface creaking softly under your weight, and you can feel the warmth of the fire brushing against your boots, melting away the stiffness in your toes inch by inch until sensation returns, slow and almost painful, but grounding in a way that reminds you you're safe for the moment. Your cloak still carries the cold of the tower in its folds, crisp along the edges, smelling faintly of smoke, sweat, and winter, and as the fire touches it, tiny curls of steam rise from the damp wool, disappearing into the dim air, like little ghosts fleeing from the warmth. A pot sits near the flames, its contents simmering faintly, a simple broth prepared by the kitchen hands, thin but warm, infused with herbs and scraps left from yesterday's meals, and the scent drifts toward you in comforting waves, promising not luxury but life, not richness but restoration, the kind of food that refills the body after a long freezing night. You lean back against the wall, letting your eyes close, feeling the weight of your duty loosen slowly, your muscles softening, your breath deepening, and for a moment you exist in perfect stillness, the warmth of the fire before you, the cold fading behind you, the castle waking gently around you. And in that quiet moment, you understand what medieval guards cherished most. Not the glory, not the armor, not even the weapons at their side, but the simple privilege of stepping out of the cold and into a small pocket of warmth where their bodies could finally rest without fear, where the stone no longer bit into their skin and the wind no longer whispered threats through every crack. Your eyelids grow heavy once more, the warmth lulling you into softness, and you allow yourself to drift towards sleep, knowing you have earned it, knowing another guard now bears the cold above, knowing that for a short while you are safe, wrapped not in layers of wool or fur, but in the fragile comfort of firelight. You sit there for a while, half awake and half dreaming, letting the fire warm your boots and loosen the rigid tension in your chest. And as your breathing deepens, you can feel the weight of the long night finally catching up to you, sinking into your shoulders, your eyelids, your spine, urging you gently but firmly toward rest. Because now that your duty is finished and the cold no longer clings to your bones with the same sharpness, the body begins to ask for what it has been denied for hours. Real sleep, deep and uninterrupted, not the fragile drifting you stole in the tower. Around you, the castle continues to wake, but slowly, like an old creature stretching its limbs after a long slumber, and you hear the subdued murmurs of servants tending to their early tasks, the soft clatter of pots being gathered near the hearth, the faint rhythm of someone sweeping frost and dirt from the central hall, each sound familiar, each one part of the daily cycle that follows the long night watch. You breathe in again, catching the warm scent rising from the simmering pot, herbs, onion skins, maybe a scrap of carrot, simple ingredients, but in this moment they smell almost beautiful, promising comfort that goes beyond taste, reminding you of the first warmth of the day that fills your stomach and pushes the cold farther away from the center of your chest. The fire crackles gently, sending up tiny sparks that whirl briefly in the air before fading, and you stare at them through drooping eyelids, watching their brief dance like miniature stars rising and disappearing, and you think about how many guards before you must have stared into flames exactly like these, letting the soft, repetitive glow ease them down into rest after the bitter wind and the endless hours of vigilance. Your body leans back more fully against the wall now, the rough stone warm from the hearth's heat, and you feel a slow wave of relief spreading through your limbs, the kind that comes when danger and cold have both loosened their hold, leaving only exhaustion behind, and you tug your cloak closer around you, wrapping it almost like a blanket, letting the wool trap the rising warmth that now fills the lower chamber. For a brief moment you think about lying down completely, on the bench, on the floor, anywhere, and you know that if you did, you would fall asleep instantly, because your mind has reached that soft, heavy state where thoughts drift like snowflakes in still air, falling slowly, silently, without direction or urgency. But instead you stay seated, letting your head tilt forward slightly, chin brushing against your cloak, and the warmth of your own breath settles around your face, forming a tiny pocket of comfort that pulls you deeper into drowsiness. Your surroundings blur gently. The fire's glow softens, the sounds around you merge into a low, steady hum, the warmth on your skin becomes a gentle blanket, and as your eyes slip closed once more, you feel your body surrender to rest at last. Not the shallow half-sleep of the tower, but something heavier, steadier, richer, the kind that medieval guards longed for every time they braced themselves against freezing winds. You drift away slowly, like a boat carried by a quiet current, your thoughts loosening one by one, falling silent, until all that remains is the distant crackle of the fire, the faint warmth on your knees, and the soft rhythm of your breath rising and falling, a quiet reminder that for the first time in many hours, you are safe, warm, and allowed to sleep. And as the morning sun finally begins to lift itself above the horizon, sending its pale light spilling across the courtyard, and slipping through narrow slits in the stone, you sink deeper into that precious, heavy slumber, the brief but sacred gift that medieval guards cherished more than any comfort the day could offer. You sleep there on the bench, wrapped in your cloak, head tilted forward, breath rising in a slow, steady rhythm, and though the sleep is heavy, it is not deep, the kind of rest that captures you quickly, but lets go just as easily, because even here, close to the hearth, the cold still lingers at the edges of your awareness, reminding you that warmth in a medieval castle was always temporary, always borrowed, always slipping away the moment you stopped chasing it. Gradually, the sounds of morning begin to press softly against your half-dreaming mind, the hushed voices of servants moving through the halls, the clinking of pots being stacked near the hearth, the distant thump of a door being opened to let in a rush of icy air from the courtyard, and each sound nudges you gently upward from the depths of sleep, pulling you back toward waking like a warm hand placed against your shoulder. You shift slightly, the bench creaking beneath you, the pelt slipping from your lap and landing on the floor with a muted thud, and as your eyes flutter open, you feel the warmth of the fire still lingering on your face, a soft reminder that while the cold outside is merciless, the castle's heart, these small hearths, these narrow chambers, offered bubbles of comfort that guards clung to whenever they could. The light in the room has changed. It's no longer the dim orange of dawn firelight, but a pale, diffused glow filtering through a narrow window high on the wall, a thin slice of winter morning slipping inside, softening the stone, illuminating the dust drifting lazily in the air, and you realize that the sun, though weak and distant, has finally risen. You pull your cloak tighter around yourself, feeling the fabric warmed unevenly, one side still radiating the heat it absorbed from the fire, the other side stiff and cool from the long hours spent in the tower, and as you inhale, you taste the mingled scents of ash, damp wool, earth, and faint herbs rising from the pot near the hearth. Around you, the castle hums with the low, steady rhythm of early activity. A pair of servants whispering as they carry wood inside, a stable boy returning from the courtyard with frost on his sleeves, the faint rumble of barrels being rolled across stone floors, each sound blending into the morning, like threads woven into a familiar tapestry. You rub your face slowly, feeling the roughness of unshaven skin, the stiffness of cold-numbed muscles returning to life, and as your fingers brush your eyelids, you're reminded again of the harshness of the night you endured, the freezing wind, the restless drafts, the thin bedding, the weight of vigilance pressing on your shoulders, and you feel a quiet, humble pride settle through you, a recognition that surviving the night was an accomplishment in itself. A guard walks past the doorway, his boots echoing faintly, as he moves toward the outer yard, cloak wrapped tightly around him, spear resting over one shoulder, and he glances your way with a look of mutual understanding, a silent acknowledgement exchanged by men who know the toll a winter watch takes, who know the cold not as a passing discomfort but as a constant adversary. You return the nod, letting your hands fall onto your knees with a soft exhale, and for a moment you simply sit there, absorbing the morning light, the warmth still lingering from the fire, and the quiet pulse of life stirring through the castle. And though your body still aches, though the cold still bites faintly at your fingers, you feel a small sense of peace growing within you. The night has passed. You endured it, and the castle lives on because men like you held the watch. But you also know that the cold does not truly leave, not even when the sun rises, because medieval castles were built for strength, not comfort, with walls so thick they swallowed warmth and exhaled frost, no matter how many fires crackled in the hearths below. You stand slowly, stretching your back, feeling the stiffness of the long night loosen slightly, and as your feet touch the floor you sense the cold still coiled there, like an old beast waiting for night to return, and you know that when dusk comes again, the same rituals will repeat, the layering of clothes, the climb into the tower, the fight against the drafts, the shallow sleep stolen between rotations. But for now, In this precious moment, the castle is waking gently. The fire still glows, and warmth, however fragile, rests against your skin, like a promise that you have a little more time before the cold calls your name again. You remain on the bench for a few moments, letting your mind stretch slowly like an exhausted arm reaching toward the edges of a warmer room, after a long and bitter night. And as you breathe in deeply, you feel your chest rise and fall in a rhythm far calmer than anything you felt in the tower, because here, even though it is not truly warm, the air no longer bites at your cheeks or claws through your layers with the same merciless sharpness. And in that small but meaningful difference lies the entire world of a medieval guard. A world where comfort never meant softness, but simply the absence of pain, where warmth was not abundance, but a brief reprieve from the cold's unending siege. You rise with slow, heavy movements, your joints protesting from hours spent braced against wind and stone, and as you look around the small chamber, you see the fire burning low in the hearth, the flames curled at the edges like a tired animal settling into rest, their glow casting soft, wavering shadows along the thick walls, shadows that sway gently as if breathing alongside you, giving the room a faint impression of being alive and quietly grateful that you have survived yet another winter night. The air carries the familiar scent of warm wool, faint smoke, and damp earth, a scent that captures the essence of medieval existence in a way no painting or museum could, the scent of enduring, of living through cold nights armed with nothing but simple materials and stubborn resolve. And as you inhale it, you feel a thin ribbon of warmth enter your lungs, loosening your mind, reminding you that even in a stone fortress there are pockets of gentleness waiting for those who have earned them. You step closer to the hearth, extending your palms toward the weak flame, and the heat that touches your skin is almost painful at first, a sharp testament to how cold you still are. But as seconds pass, it softens into a soothing glow, and you watch your fingers shift from dull, colourless stiffness to a more lively warmth, each pulse of blood returning like a spark rekindled in a dying ember. Behind you the room fills slowly with the quiet stirrings of other guards, each man recovering in his own way, rubbing his hands vigorously, stretching legs stiffened by hours of immobility, pulling cloaks tighter before untying them again, as warmth creeps back into the body, and you sense a subtle camaraderie in this shared fatigue, an unspoken bond among men who know that surviving the night is its own kind of victory. As the pale morning light filters through the narrow window, soft and faint as a whisper against the stone, you lift your gaze and feel a small, humble pride settle inside you. Not a pride born of heroism or triumph, but of endurance, of having faced the cold and kept your post even when the night pressed in from all sides, and you realize that medieval life was built not on great moments of glory, but on countless small acts of perseverance carried out in silence. You remain there near the fire for a few long breaths, allowing its warmth to seep into you layer by layer, and you feel your body begin to rearrange itself slowly, like a machine that has pushed through hours of strain at the edge of freezing, and is now cautiously restarting its inner gears. And this gradual return to life is something every medieval guard knew intimately. The slow reawakening of flesh after a night spent fighting the cold. You flex your fingers and feel the odd mixture of tingling, burning, heaviness and relief as blood returns to them, a reminder that only a few degrees separated discomfort from injury. And as the stiffness fades, you understand just how fragile last night's balance truly was, how easy it would have been for your hands to become numb beyond recovery. You stretch your legs as well, each movement sending dull pulses of soreness through your calves, knees, and hips, and you realize how deeply the cold had settled into your joints, turning your limbs into rigid pieces of hardened rope that now slowly soften with each passing moment of warmth. And you marvel quietly at how medieval guards endured this cycle night after night without complaint. You lift the clay cup from beside the fire, its rim pleasantly warm against your lips, and sip the thin broth inside, feeling the heat travel down your throat and expand through your chest and stomach like a small sun igniting inside you. and for a moment you simply close your eyes, letting that warmth spread outward until it reaches the very tips of your fingers and toes. A simple, modest moment of healing that feels almost luxurious after the bitterness of the night. Around you, the other guards continue their own quiet rituals of recovery, some rubbing warmth back into their hands with slow, deliberate motions, others tugging on their boots or adjusting cloaks that have stiffened from frost, all of them sharing the same fatigue, the same silent relief, the same understanding that they have survived something harsh and relentless, even if no enemy ever appeared at the gate. For a brief moment you think of the men who are still in the tower now, fighting the very cold you just escaped, and though a flicker of sympathy moves through you, it is quickly tempered by the knowledge that this rotation is the rhythm of castle life, an unending exchange of burden and relief that binds every guard into a single shared struggle. And so you rest your back against the warm stone near the hearth, letting your eyelids lower as warmth loosens the last knots in your shoulders and chest, and you understand in a quiet, instinctive way that these small comforts, a hot drink, a flickering fire, a room without drafts, are not trivial but sacred in a world ruled by winter, precious victories that make the difference between enduring another night or falling to its cold indifference. You remain by the fire a little longer, letting the heat work its slow, stubborn way through your layers and into your bones, and as you sit there you can almost feel your body returning to itself, reclaiming movement and sensation piece by piece in a process so gentle and gradual that it feels less like recovery and more like thawing, like ice melting away from the inside. You flex your toes inside your boots, wincing at the prickling sting of returning warmth, and you roll your shoulders back, feeling the dull ache of muscles that held tension for far too long, and each movement reminds you that the cold did not simply press against your body last night. It entered you, settled in your joints, tried to hollow you out from within, and only now is it slowly releasing its grip. You take another sip of broth, and this time the warmth spreads faster, rising toward your head and softening the heaviness behind your eyes, and as the steam drifts upward you breathe it in, letting the scent of herbs and wood smoke fill your lungs until even your breath feels warmer, steadier, no longer the shallow gasps of a man trying to outlast the frost. The room around you comes into clearer focus, the gentle crackling of the fire, the soft murmur of guards, speaking in low, tired voices, the muffled footsteps of servants beginning their morning tasks, and all of these sounds blend into a quiet reassurance that the worst is over, that the cold outside may still prowl the courtyards and walls, but here, at least for now, you are safe. You rise to your feet slowly, the movement careful and stiff, and though your legs feel heavy and your back complains, there is warmth inside you now, not much, but enough, and with each small victory over stiffness you feel more like yourself again, a man rather than a figure carved out of frost. You pull your cloak tighter around you, not because you're freezing anymore, but because the weight of it feels comforting, grounding, a reminder that the fight against the cold continues, but no longer with desperation, and as you stand there near the fire, you feel a quiet gratitude for every simple element that now protects you. The wool on your shoulders, the heat on your skin, the warm broth settling in your stomach, and the knowledge that you have made it through another night. And with that gratitude warming you almost as much as the fire itself, you close your eyes for a brief moment, just long enough to feel the last traces of tension melt away, and you allow yourself to breathe deeply, slowly, peacefully, knowing that for a short while your body can rest, recover, and gather strength before the cold calls you again to the tower. You linger near the fire for a few final breaths, feeling the warmth settle deeper into your chest and hands, and when you finally push yourself upright, your movements are slow and deliberate, the kind of sluggish motions a body makes only after wrestling through a long night of freezing winds and shallow sleep. And as you turn away from the hearth, you feel a gentle reluctance tug at you, as though your bones themselves wish to remain in the warmth a little longer. But you know that the true rest you need, the kind you can sink into fully, waits for you in the sleeping quarters deeper inside the castle, where the walls are thicker, the the drafts fewer, and the bedding, though simple, feels like a blessing after the stone-hard brutality of the watchtower. You step into the hallway, and the difference is immediate. The air is still cold, still holding the bite of winter, but it is no longer hostile, no longer slicing at your face or creeping through every seam in your clothing, and instead it feels muted, softened by distance from the tower, like a half-forgotten memory, rather than an immediate threat. And as you walk under the faint glow of torches flickering along the corridor, you feel your body loosen with each step, drawn forward by the promise of even the smallest refuge. The torches throw long, wavering shadows across the stone, shadows that stretch and bend as you pass, moving like slow tides across the floor, and their gentle dance gives the passageway a strange and sleepy warmth, as though the castle itself is drowsy, rubbing its eyes after enduring the same night you have just escaped. And this quiet companionship between man and fortress eases something tight inside you, reminding you that even in a place built for war, there are moments of softness. You pass servants carrying buckets of water and bundles of cloth, their faces still groggy from the early hour, and they glance at you with a kind of quiet respect, not admiration but understanding, because they have seen countless guards descend from the night watch, with that same pale, exhausted look, and they know it takes a certain stubbornness of spirit to walk willingly into the coldest parts of the castle, while the rest of the world sleeps. When you reach the heavy wooden door of the sleeping quarters and push it open, the hinges groan softly, releasing a pocket of air that is still cool but gentler than anything you have felt for hours, and the room beyond feels almost welcoming in its austerity, low pallets of straw, wool blankets tossed carelessly across them, cloaks hanging from iron hooks, boots left near walls to dry, and a faint smell of earth and woven fabric that has settled into the stone like a permanent signature of people who come here seeking relief. You move toward an empty pile of straw and lower yourself to your knees, the dry stalks rustling beneath you, in a sound that is somehow both rough and comforting, and as you ease your body onto the bedding you feel the straw shift to cradle your weight, moulding itself around your hips, shoulders, and spine with a crude but honest support that your frozen muscles accept with immediate gratitude. You pull your cloak over yourself like a heavy blanket, letting it fall around your shoulders and chest, trapping the fragile warmth your body has regained, and as the mantle settles over you, you feel as though something inside you collapses, not in defeat, but in relief, a soft surrender into safety. After hours of strained vigilance, a quiet letting go that only comes when a man finally reaches a place where the cold cannot immediately follow him. Your eyes begin to droop, the world blurring softly at the edges, and every breath you take seems to carry you a little deeper into a warmth that is not physical but emotional, the warmth of knowing you have endured the worst of the night, and now have earned a few precious hours of true rest, the kind of sleep that comes not lightly or cautiously, but with the full weight of exhaustion pulling you under. You stretch out on your side, the straw rising around you like a crude nest, and as your head rests on your arm you feel your consciousness slipping, gently and inevitably, into that deep, heavy sleep that only men who have battled the cold can truly understand. A sleep untouched by dreams, steady and absolute, where your mind sinks into darkness without resistance, and your body finally stops shivering, finally stops tightening, finally stops fighting. And in those last quiet seconds before your awareness dissolves completely, you feel a soft, instinctive gratitude, not for grand comforts or luxuries, but for the simple blessings that kept you alive. The straw beneath you, the cloak around you, the tiny ember you warmed your hands against, and this small, dim room where for a little while the cold cannot reach you. You fall into sleep with the heavy stillness of a stone dropped into deep water, sinking fast and silently through layers of exhaustion, and for a long moment, or perhaps for many, your mind floats in a quiet darkness where neither cold nor duty can reach you, a rare and fragile peace that medieval guards cherished more than food or fire, because it was the only moment in their day when the world asked nothing of them, when the watchful tension in their shoulders at last released, and the constant threat of freezing simply faded into nothingness. Your breathing grows slow and anchored, settling into a rhythm that matches the soft rustling of straw beneath you, each exhale warm against the inside of your cloak, forming little pockets of heat that gather around your chest and face. And even though the room is still cool, the warmth you create for yourself becomes a small sanctuary, held together by your own body and the thick wool cocooned over you. Around you the sounds of the castle continue, muffled and distant, woven into your sleep like faint threads in a dream. The low murmurs of servants preparing the day's chores, the crackle of distant fires being lit in other rooms, the muffled thump of boots moving down the hall, and even the occasional groan of the castle's timber beams stretching in the morning air. But none of it pulls you awake, because the depth of your exhaustion has pushed you far beyond light rest, into that deeper realm where your body finally begins repairing itself. The straw shifts as you breathe, its dry, earthy scent rising gently around you, mixing with the faint musk of wool, and the lingering traces of smoke clinging to your cloak, and these scents settle into your dreams, becoming part of the quiet landscape your mind drifts through, a landscape shaped not by fantasy, but by the materials of your own survival: hay, wool, stone, and ember. Your muscles loosen further, the stiffness in your legs dissolving in the warmth you've gathered under the cloak, and your mind stops replaying the night's cold, the wind on the battlements, the sound of boots climbing the stairs, because here in this dim, sheltered space, you are finally allowed to forget, if only for an hour or two, that such things exist at all. Time becomes soft and formless around you, slipping by without shape or direction, and you do not feel the morning sun inching higher, or the castle gradually filling with life, because sleep holds you too tightly, keeping you suspended in a place where thoughts arrive and vanish without meaning, where your breath is the only anchor, and your body the only thing that remains real. Somewhere in the distance a door closes, perhaps a torch is being replaced, perhaps a bucket is set down near the hearth, but none of these actions disturb you, because the world beyond your closed eyes feels impossibly far away, as though wrapped in layers of wool and blankets that separate you from everything except the simple, heavy warmth pressed against your skin. And yet, even in this deep rest, somewhere in the quiet corners of your mind, there lingers a faint awareness, a soft whisper that knows the cold will return, that the next night will require the same rituals, the same layering of wool, the same struggle on the battlements, the same shallow half-sleep stolen under pelts and beside dying embers. But this awareness does not disturb you, because exhaustion has made peace with certainty, and right now your only responsibility is to breathe, and to let your body reclaim what the night stole from it. So you drift deeper still, sinking into the warm hollow you've made in the straw, your cloak rising and falling in slow, even waves, and for this brief stretch of daylight, the castle holds you gently, allowing you to sleep like a man who has survived something harsh and unrelenting, allowing you to rest with the knowledge that, for a little while at least, the cold waits outside and cannot follow you into your dreams. You remain submerged in that deep, heavy sleep for what feels like an unmarked stretch of time, and while your body lies still on the straw, wrapped in your cloak like a cocoon spun from wool and breath, the castle around you begins its own slow awakening, moving through the rhythms of morning without demanding your presence, as though the world has agreed to carry on quietly while you drift in the safe, warm hollow you've carved for yourself. Somewhere far down the corridor, a broom scrapes against stone, sweeping dust and straw toward a doorway, and the sound echoes softly in your dreams, transformed into something gentle and distant, like the sound of wind brushing through dry grass on a summer hillside, a memory so faint and warm that your sleeping mind accepts it without stirring, folding it into the landscape of your rest. In the kitchens below, a fire crackles to life, the scent of smoke and early morning broth curling up through cracks in the floors and drifting along the passageways, and though it never reaches you directly, Some quiet part of your awareness senses its presence, that steady reminder that life continues even as you lie perfectly still, breathing slowly, safely, deeply. You shift slightly in your sleep, turning onto your other side, making room for the heat your own body has built beneath the wool, and the straw beneath you rustles softly, reshaping itself to cradle your ribs and knees, as though this crude bed has learned your shape, learned how to hold you gently through the heaviest stretch of recovery, and in that small tactile comfort you sink even deeper into rest. From the courtyard comes the muted thud of hooves, perhaps a stable boy leading a horse out for water, and his footsteps blend with the muffled snort of the animal, forming a soft rhythmic pulse that vibrates faintly through the floor and into your bones, not enough to wake you, but enough to become part of the castle's slow, steady heartbeat, a distant reminder that dawn and duty exist even if they cannot reach you yet. You breathe in through your nose, taking in the faint scent of dried straw, old wool, and the lingering trace of smoke from the hearth downstairs, and these scents wrap themselves around you like layers of memory, each one tied to survival, each one reminding your body that it is safe now, that for this brief period there is no wind pressing into your bones, no icy draft licking at your ankles, no need to be half awake and ready to grab a spear at the slightest sound. The footsteps in the hallway grow slightly louder, then fade again, voices murmuring in low tones as people go about their tasks, but the sounds pass like gentle waves, brushing the edge of your consciousness before drifting away without disturbing the deep, protective stillness that holds you in place. Your muscles relax further, softened by warmth and the slow unwinding of tension, and even the ache in your shoulders fades, dissolved by the heavy weight of rest that wraps around you like a blanket, heavier than wool, a blanket woven from exhaustion, relief, and your body's slow return to equilibrium. In this quiet hour, the castle seems to shift into a different mode, not the echoing fortress of the night watch, but a softened, muted place where tasks are performed with gentler movements, where fires are coaxed awake and bread is kneaded slowly, where the great stone corridors echo not with urgency but with calm routine. And in this softer atmosphere your sleep becomes even deeper, as though the entire castle has agreed to hold its breath on your behalf. You remain untouched by the morning's concerns, suspended in a kind of warm oblivion that medieval guards rarely enjoyed for long, and with each slow breath, the warmth beneath your cloak steadies, the straw supports you, and the world outside cannot persuade you to rise, not yet, not until your body decides it has gathered enough strength to open its eyes and face the cold once more. And so, for a while longer, the castle breathes without you, its stones shifting gently, its fires crackling softly, its people moving in low-voiced rhythm, and you sleep through it all, wrapped in wool and silence, drifting deeper into a rest earned through endurance, knowing that this brief peace, like every comfort in a medieval life, is precious precisely because it is temporary. You begin to wake not because of any sudden noise or disturbance, but because the warmth you built under your cloak has shifted slightly, a thin ribbon of cooler air slipping beneath the folds and brushing against your side, like a quiet reminder that rest in a medieval castle is never infinite, and as your eyes remain closed you feel your awareness rising slowly through layers of sleep, as if surfacing through deep water toward a pale and distant light that you are not yet ready to face. Your breathing changes first, the long, heavy exhales becoming shorter and more deliberate, and the softness around your body becomes clearer, the straw pressing lightly against your back, the uneven cushions it forms around your hips and shoulders, the slight prickle of a stalk against your cheek, the coarse wool draped across your chest, absorbing the little warmth that remains, and these sensations, so familiar and fragile, begin anchoring you once more to the waking world. Far away, or perhaps not so far, you hear the steady murmur of morning life gathering strength, the deep rumble of a cart being rolled across the courtyard stones, the faint clink of metal from the kitchens where pots are being moved, the muted laughter of two servants sharing a whispered joke before the day's harder tasks begin. And all of these sounds form a thin thread of reality tugging gently at your consciousness. You stretch one leg beneath the cloak, feeling the stiffness still lodged in the muscles from the long night on the battlements. And as your toes press against the straw, your body answers with a slow, reluctant ache, a reminder that cold does not leave easily, but lingers inside you like a shadow that must be pushed out inch by inch with warmth and movement. You shift your weight slightly, and the straw shifts with you in a soft, dry rustle, releasing its earthy scent into the air, that smell of fields, of harvest, of simple things grown and gathered long before they became bedding. And as it rises around you, your mind stirs with a faint sense of gratitude for even this crude comfort, because after the lifeless hardness of stone and the merciless bite of wind, this fragile nest feels almost like kindness. You open your eyes at last, slowly blinking at the dim, pale light leaking into the room from a narrow window high on the wall, and the world comes back into focus piece by piece. The wooden beams above your head, darkened by smoke and years, the faint outlines of other sleeping guards curled beneath their own cloaks, the distant glow of a fire in another room flickering across stone, and the muted breath of the castle itself, steady and unhurried in the soft cradle of early morning. As you lie there quietly, your mind still caught halfway between dreams and duty, you become aware once more of the cold waiting beyond the edges of your warmth. Not the vicious cold of the tower, but a gentler, persistent chill that lives permanently in the stones, a reminder that comfort here is always temporary, always borrowed, always something that slips away as soon as you move too far from the fragile warmth you've built. You inhale deeply, feeling the cool air fill your lungs and clear your thoughts, and with that breath comes the quiet knowledge that soon you will have to rise, rolling away from the thin pocket of heat beneath your cloak, placing your feet on the hard floor where the cold will climb up your bones once more, and facing whatever tasks the day demands of you, whether they are mundane or steeped in danger. But for this one moment suspended between sleep and waking, between warmth and cold, between the softness of rest and the harshness of duty, you allow yourself to remain still, gathering the last fragments of strength that sleep has restored, letting your body hold on to the warmth a little longer before surrendering it again to the castle's eternal winter. And as you take another slow breath, your eyelids fluttering with the last remnants of drowsiness, you understand that waking is its own kind of endurance. A gentle battle fought each morning against the cold, against fatigue, against the weight of another day, and you prepare yourself quietly, patiently to rise into that world once more. You lie there for one more lingering moment, suspended in that quiet boundary between warmth and cold, between rest and responsibility, and as your eyes blink fully open, you feel the faint reluctance in your limbs, a gentle refusal from your muscles to abandon the small pocket of comfort they fought so hard to build, and you breathe in slowly, letting the cool air settle into your chest as though preparing yourself for the slow return to duty that every medieval guard must face after even the shortest sleep. You push the cloak aside with a sluggish movement, and immediately the chill in the room rises to greet you, sliding across your skin like the shadow of the night that has not fully left, and you feel your breath catch ever so slightly as your body registers the change, pulling your warmth inward instinctively. But even this sensation carries no surprise, only the familiar understanding that warmth in a castle is not a constant, but a brief loan that must always be returned when morning arrives. You sit up on the bedding of straw, the stalks shifting beneath you with a soft crunch, and your body responds like an old wooden gate slowly opening after a long frost, every joint giving a small protest, every muscle stretching out stiffness that has woven itself into you during the night on the battlements. And as you stretch your arms forward, you feel the cloak slide down your back, exposing your shoulders to the cool air that settles instantly along your skin. Around you, the dormitory is waking as quietly as you are, with guards shifting under their cloaks, some rubbing their faces to chase away the last threads of sleep, others rolling slowly to their feet, each man caught in his own private struggle to pull himself from dreams and prepare for the reality that awaits outside these walls, and you feel a kind of shared kinship in that struggle, a silent understanding that medieval life offered no gentle awakenings, only the steady rhythm of survival. As you rise to your feet, your boots touch the cold floor, and the shock travels upward like a thin arrow of ice, reminding you that the warmth you carried in your sleep has already begun to slip away. But you steady yourself with a slow exhale, knowing that in this world discomfort is not the exception but the ordinary thread woven through each day, and that enduring it is simply another part of your duty. You gather your cloak around your shoulders, pulling it tight across your chest, and as you fasten the clasp you notice how stiff the wool has become along the edges, still holding the memory of last night's frost, but the heaviness of it brings comfort nonetheless, grounding you in the familiar weight that protects you when the wind howls along the walls and tries to bite through every layer you own. You look around the room once more, taking in the quiet hush of men waking from sleep, the slow, rhythmic sound of someone tying his boots, the low murmur of a whispered greeting, the heavy breath of someone stretching his arms after a long night. And this gentle collection of human noises makes the room feel warmer than it truly is, filling the cold stone chamber with a softness that exists only in shared fatigue and quiet mornings. When you finally bend to lift your belt and strap it around your waist, the leather is cool against your fingers, and the simple action brings you back fully into the world of tasks, of responsibilities, of watch rotations, and you know that soon you will need to step outside this pocket of subdued warmth and rejoin the castle as it awakens, the courtyard filling with smoke from the morning fires, the stable boys leading horses through frost, the kitchens bustling with early work, the guards exchanging reports on the night just past. But for now, in this small moment before stepping back into duty, you pause and inhale deeply, letting the quiet of the room settle into your bones, letting the faint warmth in the air wrap around you a final time, letting the memory of sleep soften the edges of your thoughts, before the cold inevitably sharpens them again. And as you take that breath, standing there with your cloak gathered tightly around you, and your feet planted on the chilled floor, you understand that rising in a medieval castle was never an abrupt moment, but a careful transition, a gentle negotiation between body and cold, between rest and responsibility, and with a calm acceptance you prepare yourself to cross that boundary, ready once more to face whatever the day demands. You move toward the doorway slowly, each step a negotiation between the lingering heaviness of sleep still coiled inside your muscles and the unavoidable pull of morning responsibilities waiting beyond the threshold. And as you walk, the soft rustle of your cloak follows behind you like a tired shadow, reminding you with every movement that rest is always temporary here, that warmth fades quickly, and that the cold, patient and eternal, is already slipping through the cracks to reclaim its place along the stone floors and walls. When you reach the wooden door, you pause for a brief moment, letting your hand rest on the iron latch, its metal chilled from the night, and biting faintly against your skin. And in that pause you breathe in deeply, feeling your chest expand with air that is cool but no longer cruel, the breath steadying your thoughts and bracing your body in a quiet ritual practiced by countless guards before you, who learned that readiness in a castle is not a sharp alertness, but a slow awakening of will. You open the door and the corridor greets you with its familiar cold, not a violent surge, but a steady, creeping presence that slips around your legs and brushes against your arms, and as you step into it you feel your body instinctively tighten, as though every part of you remembers the hours spent in the tower last night, and responds with a cautious alertness. But the cold here is more bearable, not gentle but predictable, a constant companion whose presence you have come to accept. The hallway stretches out in a long line of flickering torchlight, each flame swaying with the faint draughts that whisper their way through unseen cracks, and these pale flames cast thin shadows that move along the walls like restless spirits, elongating and shrinking with every shift in the air, and there is something strangely comforting in their ceaseless movement, as though the castle itself is stretching awake around you after sharing the same long night. You begin walking, and as your boots strike the stone floor with slow, measured thuds, you hear the castle's morning rhythm growing clearer with each step. The distant echo of buckets clanking near the well, the muted scrape of a broom pushing dust across the flagstones, the soft hum of servants speaking in low voices as they prepare fires and carry water, and all of these sounds weave together like threads of a tapestry that tells you the fortress is returning to life, one quiet tusk at a time. You pass by narrow arrow slits that let in thin blades of pale morning light, each strip of brightness drifting across your path in long, cold strokes, and as you glance toward them you see the faint white sheen of frost still clinging to the courtyard stones outside, the sky above washed in a dull, wintry grey that promises neither warmth nor storm, only the steady persistence of cold that has long defined this castle's existence. When you turn a corner, you notice two guards speaking softly near the entrance to the armory, their cloaks wrapped tightly around their shoulders, their faces still marked by the heaviness of their own night watches, and as they look up and nod toward you, you feel that quiet, unspoken bond shared between men who endure the same cycles of exhaustion and vigilance, a camaraderie forged not through great victories but through the simple, repeated act of surviving cold nights together. You continue down the hall toward the central staircase, and as you descend the first few steps you feel the familiar roughness of the stone beneath your boots, the cool banister under your palm, and the cold air rising from the lower floors like a slow tide, meeting you halfway, and although the chill wraps itself around you with steady insistence, it no longer feels hostile, only inevitable, something you accept because resisting it would change nothing. With each step downward, the sounds of the castle grow louder and more layered, the clatter of cookware in the kitchens, the stomping of boots near the gatehouse, the soft neigh of horses from the stables, and these familiar noises settle into your mind with the comforting weight of routine, reminding you that your place in this vast, weather-beaten structure is part of a larger rhythm, a shared endurance that ties everyone living within these walls together. By the time you reach the bottom of the stairs, you can feel the last remnants of sleep dissolving completely, replaced by a calm readiness that is not eager but steady, the kind of readiness born from understanding that in a medieval castle every day begins the same way, in the cold, with tired limbs and heavy thoughts, yet every day must be faced nonetheless. And as you step onto the ground floor, pulling your cloak tighter around your shoulders, you breathe in once more, accepting the morning's chill as part of the world you belong to, and you move forward with quiet determination, ready to rejoin the living castle, knowing that warmth will come and go, that duty will rise and fall, and that, like the countless guards before you, you will endure whatever this day brings. As you step into the wider halls of the castle's lower level, the air feels different, still cold, still marked by the grip of winter, but carrying a faint undercurrent of movement and purpose, a warmth born not from fire but from human activity, from bodies rising and working and stirring the stillness out of the early hours, and you sense immediately that the day has begun, even if the sun outside has not bothered to brighten the sky. You walk past a pair of servants who are carrying bundles of firewood toward the kitchens, their arms straining under the weight, their breath visible in soft clouds as they shuffle along the stones, and you catch a fragment of their conversation, something about damp logs and the difficulty of keeping fires alive through the night. And even this simple exchange reminds you how central the fight against cold is to every living person inside these walls, no matter their status or strength. You continue forward, and as you near the entrance to the small kitchen hearth that serves the guards, the warm smell of rising smoke and heating clay greets you like a familiar friend, a gentle promise that despite the castle's stubborn chill, there are pockets of human-made heat scattered throughout its passageways. And as you inhale that scent, you feel a subtle shift inside your chest, a spreading warmth not of temperature but of spirit, the kind that makes the day feel just a little more bearable. Inside the small hearthroom, A cook is already stirring a pot with slow, practiced movements, her ladle dipping in and out of the thin morning broth with the same rhythm she has followed every day for years. And the sight of that routine, steady, unhurried, unchanged by the night's cold, brings a quiet steadiness to your own thoughts, as though her movements anchor the morning in place and give you something solid around which to gather your strength. She glances at you briefly, offering no words but giving a slight nod that carries an unspoken understanding between those who work in the castle at its earliest, harshest hours. And she lifts the ladle just enough to pour a small serving of the warm liquid into a clay cup, setting it on the wooden table without ceremony. And though she does not ask if you want it, you already know it is meant for you. A simple kindness, a morning ritual shared between cold guards and warm kitchens. You approach the table and wrap your hands around the cup, feeling the gentle heat seep into your palms, traveling through your fingers and up your forearms in a slow, soothing wave. And for a moment you simply stand there breathing in the steam, letting it soften the stiffness around your face and clear the last fog of sleep that clings to your mind. And the warmth, even if faint, feels like a small victory reclaimed after the long night. As you sip the broth, the warmth slides down your throat and settles in your chest like a tiny ember being protected against the wind, and the simple act of drinking becomes its own kind of awakening, not sharp or sudden but gradual and grounding, reminding you that the day does not begin with battle or urgency, but with these small sacred rituals that keep you alive in a world shaped by stone and winter. Outside the hearth room, the castle grows louder, servants calling instructions to one another, the heavy groan of wooden gates being checked, the iron rattle of weapons being inspected by men starting their own shift, and these layered sounds merge into a gentle chorus that fills the morning with purpose, reminding you that every person within these walls, from kitchen worker to soldier, is part of the same intricate machinery that allows the fortress to function despite the biting cold. You take another slow sip, feeling the heat gather inside you like a shield, thin but steady, and as you lower the cup you notice once again how cold your breath appears in the air, still visible even in this warmer room, reminding you that the castle itself remains a harsh place, indifferent to comfort, yet somehow softened by the people who move through it and carve warmth out of its stone. What strikes you most in this moment is the simplicity of things, the act of holding a warm cup, the presence of a steady flame behind you, the muted hum of life returning to the corridors, and you realize that in a medieval castle survival was not a matter of great heroics, but of hundreds of small rituals repeated with care, warming hands by a hearth, drinking broth slowly, wrapping cloaks tightly, working together to fend off the cold that seeped in through stone and air alike. And as you stand there finishing the last drops from the cup, you feel your body settle into the calm rhythm of the morning, the kind of rhythm that prepares you for whatever the day demands, and you draw a long, steady breath before setting the empty cup aside, ready to step back into the castle's chill with a warmth now anchored deep inside you, faint but determined, the ember that will carry you through the next hours. When you finally step away from the small hearth and return to the corridor, the cup now empty and the warmth inside you slowly spreading outward like the first soft glow of dawn across a frozen plain, you feel a quiet clarity settling into your mind, not the sharp alertness of a soldier preparing for battle, but the deeper, steadier awareness of a man who understands precisely what awaits him each day and meets it not with fear or resistance, but with the calm endurance that has allowed generations of guards to survive life behind stone walls. You walk toward the courtyard, the cold rising once again to greet you, curling around your ankles and brushing your cheeks with the familiar bite of winter. And as you cross the threshold into the open air, the sky reveals itself in a washed-out grey that holds no promise of warmth, but also no immediate threat, just the steady, indifferent weight of a medieval morning settling across the world, like a heavy cloak. Around you, the castle moves with a rhythm that is both ancient and unchanging, a groom brushing frost from the flank of a horse, his hands red and stiff but patient, a young servant tossing feed to birds clustered along the roofline, a pair of guards adjusting their cloaks before beginning their shift on the battlements. And as you watch these small scenes unfold, you feel a quiet kinship with them all, for every person here, no matter their task, carries some share of the cold and some piece of the castle's burden. You pull your own cloak tighter around you, feeling its familiar weight settle across your shoulders like the touch of an old friend, and with that small gesture you accept once again the simple truth that governs your life. The cold is constant, the work is endless, the nights are long, and the comforts are small, but you endure them all because you have learned how to find warmth in the narrow spaces where it hides, in the flicker of a fire, in the softness of straw, in a sip of broth, in a few hours of stolen sleep. As you cross the courtyard, your boots crunch lightly over the thin crust of frost lining the stones, and the sound echoes softly between the tall walls, rising upward toward the parapets where another guard now stands in your place. His silhouette dark against the pale sky, his posture rigid as he watches the horizon with that same mixture of vigilance and resignation you carried through the night. You pause for a moment to look up at him, and in that silent exchange, the glance of a man who has just come down, and the stillness of a man who has just taken his place, there is a shared understanding deeper than words, the knowledge that winter may numb the fingers, may gnaw at the bones, may keep even the strongest men shivering behind layers of wool and fur, but it never breaks those who learn how to rest wisely, how to endure quietly, how to find warmth in the smallest corners of a world built from stone. You breathe out slowly, your breath rising as a pale cloud in the morning air, and you realize that this final exhale carries with it the last remnants of the night. The cold that clung to your skin, the tension in your shoulders, the restless stiffness in your legs, and as the cloud dissolves, so too does the weight of the hours that came before. With your next inhale, you take in the air of a new day, still cold, still sharp, still unwelcoming, but somehow easier to face, now that your body has rested, and your spirit has found its steady center again, and you turn away from the battlements with slow, deliberate steps, ready to return to your duties, ready to walk once more into the rhythms of the castle that has become both your shelter and your challenge. And as you move forward, feeling the familiar chill settle around you like an old companion, you understand, quietly, deeply, without drama, that this is the life of a medieval guard, a life lived between cold and stone, between duty and rest, between endurance and brief pockets of warmth, a life measured not by comfort but by resilience, by the quiet strength to stand through the night, and the simple grace to sleep when morning finally allows it. And with that understanding warming you more deeply than the fire ever could, you step fully into the day, knowing that the cold will come again, knowing that the watch will return, knowing that the castle will always whisper its winter breath across your path, but also knowing, with calm certainty, that you will endure it all, just as those before you did, one night and one dawn at a time.